Hi everyone. So just to let you know, we're just going to wait till 12 to start, just to give everyone a chance to join. But feel free to start introducing yourself in the chat if you'd like to. Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Welcome. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. So I'm just going to introduce Connor here, firstly. So Connor is an ecologist with a passion for connecting people with urban nature. He's the head of learning at Chelsea Physic Garden and leads queer ecology nature walks across the UK. So just before we get started, just a few housekeeping things. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. If you've got any questions whilst the webinar is running, feel free to either put them in the chat or there should be a Q&A box at the toolbar at the bottom of the Zoom, which you can also put questions into. And then once Connor is finished, I will read through your questions and read them to him and he can answer them. So yeah, feel free to do that. And without further ado, I'll pass it on to Connor.
Hello, thank you everyone. Thank you for joining today. And yeah, thanks to the Mammal Society for inviting me along. It's a pleasure. So this talk today is about queer ecology, challenging norms in nature. I'm on Instagram, if anyone's interested, as Connor the Ecologist. And so just a bit about me. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. So I'm actually an entomologist. I feel a bit of an imposter coming to the Mammal Society, but if there's any sort of redeeming factor, it's the fact that I have to do a lot of work on dung beetles, and I spend a lot of my time looking in mammal poo. So I do feel some deep connection to mammals. So I think if you spend your days sifting through cow poo, sheep poo, horse poo, any poo you can imagine, you do find that you think a lot about mammals and what they've been eating. So I do a lot of work on dung beetles. The last year I was studying dung beetles in one of London's parks called Bushy Park in West London. And I was working on a big dung beetle project there. I'm also, I've worked as a researcher for a number of years. I worked in Singapore and Malaysia. I did a lot of camera trapping, working for an environmental consultancy, which is really a good time. And then sort of in more recent years, I've gone kind of into environmental education and trying to help inspire people to connect with nature, especially in urban places. So now I work for Chelsea Physic Garden, which is the oldest botanic garden in London, second oldest in the UK, where I'm the head of learning, and I kind of help connect people with nature. And so in the last sort of 2 years, I would say, I've got really interested in queer ecology, and I will explain what that is. But essentially, as a queer person, I have always felt so much comfort in nature as a young person, as an adult, because nature is unjudging. Yet I've always had this conflict that people would say that queerness is unnatural, and yet as someone that has spent a lot of their life studying the natural world, I see so many behaviors which could then be considered unnatural. And so I started doing these queer ecology walks and tours to kind of show people, firstly, that nature outside their doorstep where they live is really diverse and really amazing. And actually, we're only really scratching the surface of our understanding, but also to kind of challenge ourselves to think about what we consider to be natural or unnatural. And so the way that I define queer ecology is kind of to challenge what's considered natural, and to kind of look at nature through a new perspective, and to recognize the biases in scientific observation and how that influences our understanding of nature. And one of the examples that I like to use is the B movie Bugs Life Ants. Any cartoon or film that is depicting nature in some sort often depicts it through a certain lens. And to give the example about Bugs Life, or when we're talking about ants or bees, we have I often ask people, if you think about a colony of honeybees, for example, what sex do you think the workers are? And most people would think that the worker bees in a colony are male, but actually they're female. And why do we think they're male? Well, generally it's because that's kind of a scientific lens. We assume that the workers must be men, because that kind of fits our society's view of women being homemakers, men going out to work. And that's then sort of exhibited in a lot of our culture and media. So in all of these films you see as kids, you grow up thinking, okay, women are the princesses, and the men are all the workers. But actually, in a social bees colony, in an ants colony, you have a queen, which is female, and then you have all the workers, which are also female. And males are only produced towards the end of the year, late summer, and they're produced. All their job is to mate. They're essentially just moving bags of sperm, and they'll mate, they'll die. They don't contribute to the colony at all. So if we get our understanding of nature through society, through media, then it is kind of implicitly biased. And a lot of what I try and do now is to show the kind of other side to a lot of common species that we see around us, and actually they're quite misunderstood. So let's talk about some sort of scientific biases in the way that nature has been reported. And I'm going to talk about birds for a while, but I will go on to mammals, I promise. So one of the good examples is the writings of Dr. George Murray Levick, who in 1910 was on the Terra Nova expedition that set off from Cardiff, bound for the shores of Antarctica. And on board this vessel were about 65 men, including a surgeon by the name of Dr. George Murray Levick. And in those times, surgeons were responsible not only for medical tasks, but also often as photographers and as zoologists, geologists, and would collect information about the nature and geology along the expedition. And when the ship arrived in Antarctica, Levick joined a team that became the Northern Party, and they went up to a place called Cape Adare in northern Antarctica, whereas Captain Scott went to the South Pole. And so this doctor spent about a year studying the wildlife in this area, and it has one of the biggest populations of Adelie penguins in the world. And he's sort of been the first person to see the full breeding cycle of the Adelie penguin. He made some really incredible notes on their breeding. And he took his notebooks are really, really incredible. But what he also noticed was a lot of homosexual behavior or same-sex behavior between males. So males would mate with each other a lot, but also they would mate with dead penguins. And all this information was thought to be so scandalous that after he wrote it in his notebook, he went back over and glued paper on top and rewrote it in the Greek alphabet, almost so that it was kind of too sensitive for people to read, and he didn't want people to see it, so he covered it over his notes on homosexual behavior in penguins and rewrote it in Greek, because it was thought to be unnatural and not fit for the eyes of society. He did actually then, in about 1912, 1913, try to publish a pamphlet on the sexual behaviors of penguins, which included a lot of same-sex behavior, but the publishers actually rejected it. And all this knowledge then got lost in his notebooks and was only rediscovered in sort of early 2000s when they were donated to the Natural History Museum, and they then were able to publish his notes. So again, like a lot of the information on kind of queerness in quotation marks in animals has often been censored over time. And nowadays, penguins are quite well associated with homosexual behavior. So in Central Park Zoo, there are two famous penguins called Roy and Silo who had a very special pair bond. At one point, they tried to raise a rock as an egg, and then when they were later given a fertilized egg, they then raised a baby penguin together. So they were two male penguins. And actually, a number of studies have found that 28% of wild king penguins actually prefer same-sex partners. So really common in birds. Another really example in birds is in seagulls. And firstly, thankfully, you're interested in mammals. Hopefully, you don't know much about birds. But my ornithology friends would tell me, firstly, there's no such thing as a seagull. But actually, these were some of the pioneer species for homosexual pairing behavior. And it all happened in the 1970s when two UC Irvine researchers called George and Molly Hunt were busy working on the islands near Santa Barbara, California. And they were studying the behavior and mating ecology of Western gulls. And one day in 1972, Molly noticed that there were nests with 6 eggs in them. And normally these gulls would only lay 3 eggs. So this was a supernormal clutch, double the number of eggs that were anatomically possible for gulls to produce. And they thought, that's really strange. So they caught the 2 birds that were on the nest. And unfortunately for gulls, the males and females look identical. So the only way at that time to distinguish them was to dissect them. So they caught the 2 birds, they dissected the first one. They said, okay, this is the female. It looks normal. Let's look at the male. They opened the other one up and they said, oh, this is actually also a female. We must have caught the wrong one. So they went back to the field, found another nest with 6 eggs, caught the 2 birds, and again dissected them. They were both female. And they went and studied about 14,000, so 1,400 different seagulls on this colony, and found that around 14% of them were same-sex female gulls. And these gulls mate for life, so these females would fly off for part of the year, return, and then raise another chick. And the females would often go and mate with another male and then come back and raise their chicks together in a female-female pair. And when these scientists published their data, it was very objective. They just published this what they had found. It caused such uproar with loads of tabloids, as you can imagine, in the 1970s in America, saying that all this tax payers' money was wasted because a lot of conservation money is funded from government grants, and there was a huge outrage that this money had been used to study lesbian gulls. And actually, it was so caused so much controversy at the time that I think during 1978 there was a US Congress hearing, and they actually threatened to cut funding for the National Science Foundation if they kept supporting research into these lesbian seagulls. So you can then see why scientists would be really apprehensive about publishing data that is on queerness in animals, because they risk losing their funding. But what these scientists then found is that they were getting inundated with hundreds of letters from people saying, yeah, like, of course you've got same-sex pairing in females. I've been raising chickens all my life, and we've always had a pair of females that are always pair bonded. Or pigeons, for example, people are raising racing pigeons, found that, oh yeah, we'd always have a couple of females that are always pair bonded. And so it turns out that this information was kind of known anecdotally amongst lots of different people, but it had never been properly reported until then. It led to then a lot of other researchers going and studying these and reporting data on this. Now, interestingly, there was an amazing paper that was published just this week, just in time for this presentation, if it were. So it was published on the 20th of June, and it was looking at same-sex sexual behavior among mammals and how much is observed and reported by scientists. So essentially, a lot of scientists completed this survey of whether or not they'd observed same-sex behavior, same-sex sexual behavior in their study animals within mammals, and if they then had reported on it. And they found that around, so this graph here shows the number of responses, yes or no, have they observed same-sex sexual behavior in your species? And they found that around 76% of respondents had observed same-sex sexual behavior in their study species, but only about 48% collected data on it, and around 18% actually published this data. So the majority of the respondents worked on primates, of which same-sex sexual behavior is quite common. And when they were then later asked about how they recorded this same-sex sexual behavior, most of them wrote it down as play behavior, or perhaps as dominance or aggressive behavior, or as things like scent marking, rather than something that could be sexual. The thing is as well that they were later asked why they didn't publish it, and most said that generally same-sex sexual behavior was kind of rare or anecdotal, and it wasn't kind of robust enough to publish, or that this kind of data didn't really fit with their research goals. But thankfully, sort of most of them didn't report that there was discomfort or kind of concerns that their university would be opposed to it. But I guess that's the huge problem at the moment. We've got such a bias in the data that often same-sex behavior is reported as an anomaly or something that's kind of a one-off sighting and isn't properly recorded. Hopefully, I think in the last few decades, it's going to get much better in the future. I'm sure there's going to be much more research dedicated to understanding same-sex sexual behavior and kind of queerness as a whole in nature. So in order to understand kind of how we got here, we have to go back into the past. And it kind of all starts with plants. So this idea of kind of sexual systems and what's natural, unnatural, kind of originated in the 1700s with Carl Linnaeus, when he published his sexual system of plants in his 1735 publication of Systema Naturae. And essentially, so Carl Linnaeus was a botanist. He was considered the father of taxonomy. And he developed a method of categorizing and grouping plants, which he called the sexual system of plants. And essentially, it was kind of a simple classification system where the number and position of the reproductive organs of flowers were used to determine the class and order to which a plant belonged. So Linnaeus came up with a lot of metaphors. So he referred to flowers as beds, and then the stamina and the pistils, the bits that produce pollen or seeds, as husbands and wives. So this kind of system used a lot of metaphors, also linking to sort of monogamy, polygyny, to homosexuality, to incest. And he used these kind of metaphors to explain the different structures of plants to his students. But he kind of emphasized that this was kind of only a metaphorical use, and it was artificial, and it was just a diagnostic tool. But problem was, as taxonomy and categorization spread to other fields and taxa, and it was even attempted to categorize humans, this idea that husband and wife, male and female, was the norm and natural, and kind of became the law of nature. And so thanks to Carl Linnaeus, unfortunately, his kind of use of husband and wife and male and female and these binaries when describing plants then got extrapolated out and kind of became the law of nature. But actually, his use of that wasn't very good, because actually 95% of plant species do not have a distinct biological sex. So whilst he might have used husband and wife, male and female, as metaphors, in real life, it doesn't really make sense. And so the majority of plant species are what we call bisexual or hermaphrodite or sometimes perfect flowers. And this is the classic flower that you might see and you might learn about in school, where you have the anthers and the filaments, which are known as the stamens. And these produce pollen, and pollen is plant sperm. And we often don't think about plants and sperm, but if you do have an allergy to pollen, you've got hay fever, that's an allergy to plant sperm, which is a hard fact to swallow. And then the other bit is the stigma and the style, and that's known as the pistil or the carpel. And these produce the eggs in an ovary at the base of the flower. Now, whilst this is the real classic flower, and variations of this are found in around 95% of plant species, which means that you don't have distinct male or female plants in the majority of plants. It's not all about reproduction. So a good example I like to talk about is blackberries. So I don't know if you've ever been for a walk in the countryside. You've been eating on blackberries from the hedges in the late summer. And often along your walk, these blackberries can taste really different. Some taste sweeter, some taste sourer. And actually in the UK, there's around 1,000 different microspecies of blackberry. And these microspecies have evolved through asexual reproduction. So blackberries generally don't like reproducing sexually very much. They've evolved, their cells have been mutated so that they've got multiple copies of all their chromosomes, so that when they split into egg and sperm cells, each cell has got enough chromosomes to produce a complete organism. So they just clone themselves, and over time have then produced these small microspecies through asexual reproduction. And in a sort of 1 square kilometer, you can have several microspecies of blackberry. So next time you're off for a walk in the countryside, you're eating on blackberries, you might be sampling a variety of asexual colonies of blackberry microspecies. So that's the kind of classic type of flower structure. What about the other 5%? So one of the other main groups of plants are called dioecious plants. And these are plants that are unisexual, whereby you have one plant that only produces pollen, which is the sperm, and one plant that only produces the eggs or the seeds. And this is a yew here, and they're quite a common tree in the UK, all around Europe, and some of the longest living trees. The oldest tree in the UK is thought, well, one of the contenders is a yew tree up in Scotland in a place called Fortingall. And this is a tree that only produces pollen, it doesn't produce fruit. And you can describe that as being staminate because it only has stamens and it doesn't produce seeds or fruits. And so you can see there's a picture of the yew fruit there. It's a red kind of berry-like structure. And so this tree in Scotland is 5,000 years old. It only produces pollen, but about a decade ago, they noticed right at the top of the tree, there was a single branch that started to produce these red berries. So even though it was kind of distinctly kind of male for 5,000 years, it's now turned partially female. And why would a tree do this? Well, if you imagine you're a tree like this, which is only producing pollen, all you're doing is blowing your sperm into the wind for 5,000 years. You have no idea if you're producing any offspring. So in some ways, it's an advantage to become partially sort of female, be able to self-pollinate or get pollinated and produce some seeds to know that you've then passed your genetics on to the next generation. So really, in nature, there's a benefit of being fluid. And lastly, the other kind of main group of plants are plants that are monoecious. And this is where the plant itself, the individual, is non-binary, doesn't have a distinct sex, but it has parts of it that are producing pollen and parts of it that are producing seeds. And this is an older tree here, and the longer, thin catkins are produce pollen. And right next to that, you have the kind of oval-shaped seed-bearing cones that have the eggs, which then turn into seeds. So hopefully you can kind of see how Linnaeus's metaphors for husband and wife to describe parts of plants were kind of largely metaphorical, and perhaps it was not appropriate to extrapolate this idea that male and female, husband and wife, is the law of nature. So let's talk about mammals for a second and some good examples of homosexual behavior in mammals. So one of the mammals that's thought to be arguably one of the the queerest is the giraffe. And often you find that after that, male giraffes do a lot of aggressive necking, and often two males can caress each other, they can court each other, which then leads to mounting and penetration. And some studies have found that that these interactions are much more common between male giraffes than they are between male and female giraffes. And in one study, 94% of mountings took place between males, 94%, and only 6% between females and males. And so people may argue, for example, that this could be for dominance, could be for social bonding. We don't really know. But the thing is, homosexual sexual behavior exists in nature. Let's give some more examples. So whales. So in March 2024, we had the first scientifically documented male-male sexual interaction in humpback whales. And this happened off the coast of Hawaii, where these males were observed for about 30 minutes with one male penetrating the other. And it caused a bit of a stir when it was published. But it's quite undeniable. There are other pictures that are slightly more graphic, but I thought, seeing as this is a lunchtime lecture, I would sort of show the PG version. But it kind of, so again, lots of people were arguing that, oh, this was a dominance behavior, and it was a larger male that was trying to dominate over a smaller male, but we can never know. And often what we find in science and the way that same-sex behavior has been reported is that when it's between males is often reported as a dominance thing or an aggression thing. And then when it's between females, it's reported as a kind of, oh, they're just socially bonding, that type of thing. So there's a real bias in the way that we view same-sex behavior in animals and how it's reported. And lastly, about primates. So same-sex sexual behavior is really common in non-human primates, where it's been observed in at least 51 species, from lemurs to apes. So here we have bonobos, the first picture. So bonobos form a matriarchal society, which is quite unusual among apes. And they're generally considered to be kind of bisexual, with both males and females engaging in heterosexual and homosexual behavior. It's very common for female-female sex in particular, and it's thought that around 60% of all bonobo sexual activity occurs between two or more females, and it's thought to be kind of a really good bonding system between the groups. Now, in terms of orangutans, again, male homosexual behavior occurs in the wild and in captivity. It occurs in both adolescent and mature individuals. Yeah, it's really common in them. And again, has been reported in various ways. There's one case where males were performing oral sex on one another, and someone tried to argue that it was for nutritional value. Yeah, I noticed it's lunchtime. I will try and avoid this. So another example is, is the Japanese macaque. Again, like they live in these colonies, and it's really common to have same-sex relations. And often females form these kind of small groups, which is really kind of characterized by affectionate social and sexual behavior. So really common in a lot of primates. Now, I also wanted to talk about some invertebrates, seeing that I'm an entomologist, and it would be a shame to miss them out. And one of my favorite examples is actually with woodlice. They're a really common type of animal, found all in our houses. Everywhere you look, every log, every brick you turn over, there'll be woodlice there. Woodlice are crustaceans, and which means they're related to crabs and lobsters. They're not insects. They've got 14 legs. They breathe through gills. And my other favorite fact is that some species of female woodlice have a pouch under their belly, and they carry their live young in that pouch. And that pouch is known as a marsupium, after the marsupials kangaroo pouch. So what's interesting about woodlice is that scientists studying some species often struggle to find male woodlice. They can only find females. And this really confused them. And so did some experiments. In one of these experiments, they took a pregnant female woodlouse, they watched her give birth, and she only gave birth to female woodlice. And they did some more experiments where they then gave a pregnant female woodlice antibiotics. And once they did that, once they gave that pregnant female antibiotics, she started producing males and females. And it turns out that woodlice, and in fact, something like 95% of all invertebrate species, can be infected by a bacteria known as Wolbachia. And Wolbachia is a bacteria that is passed through the females of an organism. It's passed through the eggs of the female. So if the Wolbachia is born into a male woodlouse, it will die when that male woodlouse dies and it can't be passed on. Whereas if it's passed into the female woodlouse can get pregnant, can lay an egg, and pass the Wolbachia on to the next generation. So it's in the bacteria's interest to be born into a female woodlouse. And so it's evolved these really amazing adaptations whereby if a male is developing in an egg, this bacteria can change the development of the male so that it is kind of morphologically female. It's genetically male, but it's functionally female and able to reproduce and lay eggs, which is pretty cool. Problem is, though, generally woodlice reproduce sexually. Male and female need to mate to be able to produce an egg. So if there's no females around, how are they going to reproduce? So in some species, this bacteria has gone an extra level and it's changed the development of females and given them the ability to reproduce asexually. So essentially, these woodlice have gotten sick with this bacteria, become asexual and overthrown the woodlice patriarchy, which I think is fantastic. So there are so many examples in invertebrates that challenge all of our expectations of what's natural or unnatural or normal or abnormal. Slugs and snails are all hermaphrodites. They again don't have a distinct sex. A lot of invertebrates can reproduce asexually, and like, don't get me started on fungi. Fungi are like another level of amazing diversity that have. There's some species of fungi that have 23,000 different sexes, or mating types as they're called. I won't go into it here, but it will take me forever, but pretty cool. So is nature queer? So this is it's an interesting question, and for me it's a yes and a no. Same-sex sexual activity has been documented in over 1,500 animal species, but queerness is an identity that has been created by humans. It's artificial. It's kind of been used historically to mean like an other or something else that's not normal and or not natural. And arguably, if nature is exhibiting those parallels, then it is natural. And the other way to look at it is that humans are queer. Humans exist in the LGBTQ plus community, and humans are arguably part of nature. So if humans do it, then surely it is natural. Generally, I think scientists try to avoid calling animals gay or queer, but arguably you could say that maybe queerness can be found in nature, or parallels can be found in nature. And there's a lot of parallels to queerness that can be found there. Some scientists have hypothesized that actually the kind of ancestral condition of sexually reproducing animals is indiscriminate sexual behavior. And that means that the kind of ancestral behavior is the fact that individuals have sexual activity with both males and females. And that's apparently one of the hypotheses, which it kind of explains why it's found across all different taxa, across all life. So why should we care about queerness in nature? I mean, arguably we shouldn't. We should care as much about queer animals as we should about queerness in humans. It should be irrelevant. But the problem is that queerness or homosexuality is still illegal in 64 countries, with several still using the death penalty. And it's kind of, this was all based on this kind of colonial conservative views and justified by saying that people in the LGBTQ plus community were unnatural. So whilst kind of this is as much about increasing our understanding about nature, increasing conservation, it's also about protecting people from oppression and persecution, and we can't really save one without the other. So there's a really nice quote that I like, which is that it's loading, which is that the universe is not only queerer than we suppose, but is queerer than we can suppose. And this is written by an evolutionary biologist called JBS Haldane in 1927. And obviously, at that time, he didn't mean queer in the way that we mean it now. For me, I think it couldn't have been further from the truth. I think, you know, from a human perspective, nature is really weird. Like as an ecologist, I look at nature. There's so many amazing things, and to limit what we consider to be natural by our own social view is just really short-sighted. And really, the most natural thing is to be weird. So I hope you all just, if you take anything from this, it's that you should stay weird, because that's what makes you natural. So that is all from me, and I'm happy to take any questions you might like. It's a real short tour on some bits of queerness that you can be found in nature. But really, for me, I think the take home is that we all have a bias in the way we see nature, and that bias is that we're looking at nature through society's lens. And what we all need to do is to kind of just try to be more open-minded and look at nature from a new perspective. If we all do that, not only will we learn more about nature, hopefully we'll learn more about ourselves and the diversity that we find within people. And if you'd like to hear more, learn more, I do a lot of guided walks around the UK. These are often advertised on my Instagram account. And so hopefully I will see maybe some of you there. But yeah, thank you very much. And I'm open to take any questions.
Thank you. That was a really fascinating talk. Yeah, I think we've got a few questions actually that I saw coming up. Most of them are on invertebrates, not mammals, but we'll ask them anyway. So we'll start with the chat. So please feel free to keep asking your questions, and we'll get through as many as we can. So Kate asks, are worms also hermaphrodites?
Yeah, I think worms are as well. Yeah, but if you cut them in half, they will die.
That's a bit unfortunate, isn't it?
So one of the interesting things about animals that are hermaphrodites is that often they don't actually want to become pregnant. They have the ability to produce sperm and to produce eggs, but often they actually don't want to become pregnant, because if they're pregnant, they then can't reproduce. You put a lot of energy into producing the eggs. So for slugs and snails, for example, as soon as they become fertilized or inseminated, they instantly start trying to kill all the sperm within them because they don't want to get pregnant. They want to spread their seed, but they don't want the responsibility of producing eggs. So they've got these amazing adaptations they've developed to get around that, which I suggest you Google.
Amazing. Great. We've got a couple more. I think you went over this already, but maybe there's some more you want to add. Is there much recorded SSSB among insects?
Yeah, so butterflies are quite common. I think again, yeah, butterflies, it's really common to see same-sex sexual behavior between male butterflies. There's been studies looking at damselflies where if you put a load of male damselflies in an enclosure, after a while they all start trying to reproduce with each other. But then if you then introduce a load of females, often a lot of them then don't start mating with the females, they continue mating with the males. Who knows why? But yeah, there are lots of examples of same-sex behavior in insects. How much of it is choice? How much of it is just they mate with anything that they encounter? I don't know, but it definitely exists.
Great. And I just saw another question from Nick. Can you share the slides and your contact details, please? So just about the slides, this webinar is being recorded. It will be uploaded to the Mammal Society YouTube channel, where you'll be able to rewatch it if you wish to do so. But yeah, about slides and contact details, I don't know. Connor, are you?
Yeah, so I mean, I've got my Instagram up on the page now, or if you Google connorbutler.co.uk, I've got a website as well.
Thank you. And another question from Neri. How do you suggest we reduce or overcome the bias / underrepresentation of queer research?
So I guess the problem we have is that talking about queerness in nature is deemed political, and often organizations that then start talking about queerness in nature get targeted with a lot of hate. And we essentially just need a lot of organizations to start being more open to it and talking about it. And then it becomes more normalized and people don't fear the backlash as much. And so it's why it's really great that the Mammal Society are doing talks like this and doing putting out information about queer ecology, because it starts to shift the sort of baseline of what's the norm. And the more that people that are against this then feel like they're the minority, the better, I think. And then hopefully it means that funding will increase in these areas. Institutions won't be as opposed to it. So I guess the more that it's put out there, the better. And obviously people are going to get frustrated that this is a kind of new woke agenda that's being pushed in their faces. But it's only because, you know, people are still persecuted for this around the world. And we have these biases in nature that we think that's unnatural, or I'm not going to report that. But the more people become aware of it, that the better. And it'll always continue to improve.
Yeah, definitely. So sorry, I just got a mixture of questions here. So we've got one on, are there any forums or panel sessions coming up that you know of where these issues might be discussed in more detail? So just answering that from a Mammal Society side, I don't think we're planning to do any more in the near future on queer ecology, but I don't know, Connor, if you know of any other organizations or people who are doing some.
I have a few coming up, but they're not announced yet. But I've got a load of guided walks that will be happening around London and I think Swindon maybe in the next few months, and probably some online things that are happening as well, but they're not announced yet. But I think places, people like RSPB are starting to do something. There was an RSPB talk yesterday that was really great that I managed to catch the end of. So a lot of organizations are doing it. Yeah, have a Google.
Yeah, great. As kind of similar question, Nabila asks, where can we learn more about queer ecology?
Yeah, so I mean, so the garden that I work at, Chelsea Physic Garden, every year we have a queer ecology exhibition in February. And so if you're in London, I recommend you have a look at that. It's really good. There are lots of people doing really great things. So there's an artist called Sixto that has a project called Queer Botany. They've got a really great website which has loads of reference links. So I recommend you have a look at that. Yeah, so I think if you just search queer ecology on social media, there's some amazing people that are putting great content out there.
Great, thank you for those recommendations. Okay, we've got a few more questions. I'm just aware of the time, we've still got time. Someone asks, maybe a difficult question, but how can queer behavior fit into older concepts such as sexual selection?
Yeah, so I guess that's always been the kind of tricky thing when dealing with homosexual behavior, is how does it fit into sort of sexual selection and sort of Darwinian theory. I guess one way of looking at it is that, I mean, it's undeniable that same-sex sexual behavior you can't deny that it doesn't exist. You see lots of male animals reproducing with each other. You see lots of female animals also having sexual behavior. So I think you can't deny that exists. It's how we then justify what is happening through a scientific perspective. One thing is, do we need to justify it? It could be for various reasons. It could be for pleasure. It could be for socialization. Who knows? One analogy, I guess, that I sometimes might talk about is that if you look at Greek Greek mythology and Greek history, a lot of the gods like Apollo, they all had male lovers. And it was quite common at the time for men to engage in same-sex relationships. And it, it was described that at the time, homosexual behavior was less of an identity and more of a recreational activity. And I think like it's kind of just the same that I think we apply to nature, as it exists. We don't really have to justify it. It exists in humans. It exists across all spectrum of wildlife. There are a number of hypotheses as to try and justify it, but also, do we need to justify it within our? Because I guess we always try and justify it, and we always add a bit of human-centric anthropomorphism in there sometimes, and that's where it gets a bit tricky. Yeah, it's a tricky question. Maybe it just exists like it does in humans.
Right. And someone asks, as an ace person, I'm always interested in the argument that sex and gene transfer is the primary driver in nature. Do we know if ace individuals exist in nature?
Yeah, I think the kind of concept of kin selection in wildlife kind of applies to that. So you have, for example, in meerkats, you have some members of the meerkat family that will act as guards, and they often don't reproduce. If you think about honeybees or worker bees, in a social bees colony, you have a queen which reproduces, and a load of worker bees. None of those worker bees will reproduce. They're just helping the colony as a whole. And so lots of examples of that. In the plant kingdom, I did a really cool uh, project as part of the Ecology exhibition I work on at Chelsea Physic Garden. There's a type of staghorn fern, which they think is the first plant to exhibit eusocial behavior, whereby you have a big colony of these ferns that are closely related, and they live on the sides of trees in this big kind of colony. The ones at the top kind of have modified leaves to catch water, and the ones at the bottom of the colony have got modified leaves to act like a water tank to hold the water. And the ones at the bottom that hold water are so modified they don't have reproductive fronds. So they forgo reproduction in order to help the colony by acting as a water tank. So there's loads of examples across nature of individuals that forgo reproduction for the benefit of the colony or for closely related individuals. Yeah.
That's super interesting. Neve asks, although I think you've already answered this, yeah, where could you suggest looking, like which platforms to read more queer ecology and research? You kind of already answered that one. Do you have
Yeah, I
anything
mean,
else to add?
just to add, like the what is considered the Bible of queerness in nature is this book. I think it published in the 1990s, and it's called Biological Exuberance by Bruce Bagamill. And this is often referenced as kind of the main first book that kind of documented animal homosexual behavior. And it's literally just profiles of every species you can imagine and all the references to where they've been found to show homosexual behavior. So and there's now quite a lot of books. I think the Natural History Museum has just also put out a book on queer nature. I haven't read it, but I'm sure that's quite good.
Yeah, that sounds like a really interesting book. Okay, so Buffy asks, what do your guided tours include?
Yeah, sure. So I do a lot of tours. I give a lot of people bug nets, and we go catch lots of wildlife and bugs, and then we learn how to identify things, and then we learn about their really amazing reproductive strategies. the amazing features that they have. So it's kind of part learning to identify things, how to find wildlife, and then learning about the kind of really interesting lives and diversity that we find in our sort of local parks and gardens. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. Someone else asks, what is your favorite queer fungi?
Um, the so the poster child of queer fungi is the split gale fungus. Often fungi don't have just two mating types or two sexes. They have several. There's one species that's been found to have 23,000, as I mentioned earlier, and people say, well, why would that evolve? If you fungi essentially reproduce by something called hyphal touching, which is where they touch their roots together and transfer genetic material. Fungi also then, and once they've then reproduced, they can produce spores, which are kind of like seeds, which fly off in the wind, land somewhere else, and they can grow a new individual. The problem is if you're a fungi, you can't move, you're stuck in place. And so if you're only able to reproduce with ones that you can touch roots with, and there are only two sexes, 50% of the individuals you meet with are going to be incompatible with you. Whereas if there were three sexes, then only a third of the individuals you would meet would be incompatible with you. Whereas if there were 23,000 sexes, then pretty much you can guarantee that pretty much every individual you touch roots with is going to be sexually compatible with you. And so it's a huge benefit in nature to have more sexes if you can't move and you're dependent on touching to find your mate. So fungi have gone decided that variety of the spice is the spice of life, and they've gone for many different sexes. Or in fungi, they're called mating types, and you have to mate with the different mating types to become then fertile.
That's fascinating. And I think we've got one more question. So from Kate, do you have any information on butterfly queerness in particular?
Um, I don't have any information directly on butterfly queerness, sadly. Although so there's something called gynandromorphism, which is where individuals are born kind of intersex, and often in species that have different males and females, different sexual dimorphism. So often in butterflies, males might be really bright colored, females might be quite drab. You get butterflies born that are gynandromorphs, which are half male coloration and half female coloration, split down the center. And it's something like, I don't want to even guess what the stat is. It's like something in 1 in a million or something is born like that. Majority of butterflies, though, aren't dimorphic, and the males and females look the same. So you actually couldn't really tell from appearance if they have that. But it's been found in birds. It's been found in insects. Yeah, that's called gynandromorphism.
That's really interesting. We actually have one more that's just come up again. Are there multiple sexes in plants like there are in fungi?
There aren't. I don't think you could say there's multiple sexes, but 95% of plant species do not have a distinct sex. They're all non-binary. So I think again, it's this whole thing that male and female is what's natural, but actually you look at nature and it's not the case. In fact, it's the minority if you consider plants, fungi, which are the majority of all living organism species. So you could argue that having two sexes is the minority in nature. One thing actually I haven't touched upon, and we've got a few minutes left, is that actually there's a lot of links also between nature and queerness in society. And butterflies, for example, in Spanish, if someone is thought to be queer, they're known as mariposa, which is Spanish for butterfly. And plants have also got a lot of symbolism for queerness. So if you think about slurs, pansy was a slur for gay men. And early in the 1920s, if someone was a bit camp, they were said to have a streak of lavender. And so nature has also been used to kind of as a slur against a lot of the queer people, often playing on the kind of effeminate um, characteristics that flowers might have or butterflies might have. I think that's always quite interesting. And then nowadays, a lot of them have been sort of reclaimed and which I think is great.
Great. Well, if no one else has any more questions, then thank you so much, Connor. That was really a fascinating talk. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed it. Yeah, if that's all, then I'll let you have a few last words. Anything else you want to plug? You've got your Instagram up there, obviously, so everyone go follow Connor if you're not already. Um,
Thanks. No, nothing else
Nothing else.
other than just go and enjoy nature. Go for a walk in the woods as soon as you can.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a nice rest of your day. Bye bye.